TorahCafe.com.
So let's talk a little bit tonight about a topic that does need to be addressed a little bit: Eastern spirituality. Being that so many Jews are involved in it, or have been involved in it, it's appropriate to at least touch on the topic to gain ourselves a familiarity with it, and to see what's the big deal, what's the big attraction, and where we go from here. You know, the Dalai Lama actually encouraged rabbis and young Jews to expose themselves more to Jewish mysticism. He said that if a person is Jewish, they belong in Judaism. They belong in those spiritual teachings. No need to run elsewhere. Many people are into learning about Eastern spirituality primarily because of having a misunderstanding or misimpression of what Judaism is. I can tell you from personal experience, I spoke to a girl in her 20s who identified herself as a Jew-boo, a Jewish Buddhist, Jew-boo. And after a long conversation about why she enjoyed it and what was her attraction to Eastern philosophy and meditation, it basically came down to she didn't understand what Judaism was about, what real Judaism was about. And she gave me a term that I use a lot. She said the Judaism that she knows, she called it Disney Judaism. Because all she knew was from Hebrew school, which is unfortunately what many people know. You know, the crux of their philosophical ponderings into Judaism are an 11-year-old's level of Hebrew school, of Bible stories. Who in the world would appreciate anything in life that they had an 11-year-old's understanding of? So tonight, hopefully, we're going to have a little bit of an icebreaker to enable or empower people to have their own self-exploration and, furthermore, a Jewish exploration. See what's the teachings of Judaism. See what spirituality lays there. And don't just rely on your 11-year-old ideology. In Judaism, Torah is more than a book. It's described in the Medrash and the Zohar as the blueprint of creation. The Zohar says, the key text of Jewish mysticism, Istalkel baraisa ubara alma. Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. The blueprint. There's always a source in Torah for any idea that's true. It's the genetic material, the underlying of all reality. Secondly, Torah also does not just refer to the first 5 books of the Bible. Many people, when they say the Torah, they think of the Torah scroll that we keep in the Ark, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Torah refers not only to the first 5 books of the Bible, but refers to the entire body of godly knowledge, not just the first 5 books. Although the Torah was given publicly and mandated in the world, we're just a few weeks short of 3,325 years ago, this coming Shavuos, a few weeks from now, its God-given wisdom and secrets have been delved into by a segment of humanity since the beginning of time. The Perkei de Rabbi Eliezer says that Adam, the first man, learned Torah in the Garden of Eden. Noah, who lived 700 years before the Torah was given, distinguished between clean animals and the unclean animals when he's loading them into the ark. Shem and Aver, Noah's son and grandson, had a yeshiva that went constantly even before the Torah was given. It was an established place. It says even that, it's quoted in the name of Rabbi Simcha Wasserman, that Hammurabi, of Code of Hammurabi fame, was likely a dropout of the yeshiva Shem Ve'aver. Our forefathers, the Talmud, the Gemara, and Yuma says, our forefathers kept the entire Torah in all its details hundreds of years before it was given. So any source of wisdom, of spirituality, and of truth must have a direct or an indirect source in Torah. Tradition tells us that some of history's most famous and influential people, most influential philosophers, have all learned their knowledge from Torah. A 16th century Jewish mystic named Menashe ben Israel says in his work Nishmas Chaim that Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher, learned his ideas about reincarnation from the early Jewish prophets. Socrates, the Ramah, says that Socrates studied from Achitophel, who lived in the times of King David. Even amongst the Greeks, the writings of the ancient Greeks, it says that the prophet Jeremiah, when he was exiled to Egypt, was the teacher of Plato, taught Plato Torah, which is why many of his teachings are in sync with the Torah. In fact, the Ramah brings a story that when the first temple was destroyed, Plato came to see the ruins, and he saw the prophet Jeremiah there. And he said, "Jeremiah, you're a world-renowned prophet. How can you cry over bricks and mortar?" And so Jeremiah looked back to him and said, "Plato, you're one of the world's greatest philosophers. Are there any philosophical quandaries that you have not solved?" And so Plato listed a few of them to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah answered all of them, and Plato was very impressed, and he said, "The bricks and mortar that I'm crying over, that's where this wisdom came from." Jewish sources also say that Aristotle also received his wisdom from the Torah. So we see that Western philosophy, starting with Greeks and later Romans, now the whole Western world, has been shaped by the influence of Torah. And what about the East? What about Eastern thought? Now, Eastern thought is contained in many sects and religious philosophies. It would be impossible to talk about each one individually tonight or over the course, and truthfully, that's not our purpose. We're just and this is not a religious contrast study. This is just examining an overview of where Eastern theology came from. We're going to talk specifically about two traditions, Hinduism and later what came about from that was Buddhism. Hinduism is actually composed, it was formed of many diverse traditions. It's generally associated with a multiplicity of gods, and it does not advocate the worship of one particular deity. The gods and the goddesses of Hinduism amount to the thousands, each representing many aspects of one supreme being. Okay? Later on, much later, in the 5th century BCE, there was a Hindu prince named Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born as a Hindu prince. He later became known as the Buddha. The Buddha, what Buddha means is the enlightened one or the awakened one. Buddha began his meditations as a Hindu, but he was awakened with new enlightenment, only to denounce Hinduism and then emerge as the founder of a new religion. In Buddhism, they don't even believe in God, and sometimes it's considered like a refined Hinduism. Those, again, that's a very, very tip of the iceberg general look at two of the world's major Eastern religions. Again, there are many others. There are many sects within each of those. So again, we're not going to discuss specific details about each of them, but talk right now about a general picture of Eastern theology and Eastern spirituality. Where did it come from and how does it fit in the realm of Torah? So again, many different sects, many different ideologies. We're talking now about the general picture of where Eastern spirituality came from. Torah is the root of truth and spirituality, and any genuine element of reality must be encoded in it. There are truths in the East, so where does that find its place in the Torah? The Torah tells us, the end of Parshas Chayei Sarah, Genesis chapter 25, after Sarah, the wife of Abraham, passed away, Abraham gets married again. He meets a wife called Keturah. And many of our sages teach that Keturah was actually Hagar, who was his concubine earlier on. So with Keturah, the Torah tells us that he gave birth to 6 children. Okay? And this is obviously in addition to Isaac, who he had many years earlier with Sarah. What the Torah tells us is after he had these children, he gave all of his possessions and true spiritual wisdom and lineage, he conferred over to Isaac. And then it says to his 6 children from Keturah, he gave them gifts and sent them to the east, away from Isaac. He sent them to the east. The Talmud, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, says explicitly that these gifts were spiritual gifts, spiritual teachings. They were elements of Abraham's spiritual work, rudiments of esoteric wisdom, for which an entire world of spiritual wisdom could be built. I always find it kind of interesting that Chinese history begins with the 5 emperors between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. And their wisdom is attributed to spiritual giants who came from afar. You know, if we look at some of the key tenets of Hinduism, you can see some interesting ideas. Hindu means from the river. Abraham and his children called themselves Hebrew, Ivri, which means from over the river. One of the main wisdoms of the Hindu religion is called the Vedas. One of the children sent to the east was Avida. Oftentimes, the a beginning letter word A was dropped. To say a camp in Hinduism, it's called an ashram. With the children's names, the 6 children of Abraham and their children, so Rashi identifies one of their names as being a translation to a camp. What's the name of the person? Ashurim. It's significant also that the highest social class in India, who don't intermarry with the lower classes, are called the Brahmins. What many people think, and it's discussed by 16th century Jewish mystic Menashe ben Israel, that Brahmins, initially it had an A on it, it was Abrahamins. That this special sect, this special group, these wisdom, these special teachings had Abrahamic roots. In 2002, the Journal of Chinese Medicine published a fascinating article that told about a link between the contact points of tefillin of the arm and tefillin of the head, as ancient Chinese acupuncture points for spirituality and purified thought. Interesting. Now, this does not give license to us to go and practice Hinduism and practice Buddhism and to go involve in those practices, because what has happened is what started as pure and monotheistic ideology and spiritual concepts over a long period of time has gotten attached to it idolatrous associations, meaning that a lot of these potentially good ideas and thoughts and holy things that are very, very Jewish have become mixed up with a lot of other things, attributing powers and energies to things that wouldn't be considered in the line of thought of Judaism. For non-Jews, it would be a great thing. It's a great theology, it's great philosophy, and they should practice it. But as Jewish people, we have a very specific prescription in the world. Let's discuss it a little bit. Our Jewish sages over the ages have discussed the spiritual underpinnings of Hinduism and Buddhism and their status as world religions and philosophies. A modern sage, Rabbi Avraham Isaac Kook, took a look at world religion and, as far as I know, in his writings mentioned Buddhism twice, discussing it in a non-controversial, very open way. His philosophy was like this. He said that it's not that there's no light, there's no positivity elsewhere in the world, outside of Judaism, that we're the only ones with the truth and we're the only ones with the secrets. It's not that. That's not the case. There is light elsewhere. It's just that it's more pristine in Judaism. He contrasted it with the life force that is present in a blade of grass. There's life there. It's living. And that which is in the cedars of Lebanon. A very vibrant, powerful, and palatable energy force. Let's start a little bit with some of the similarities between Judaism and particularly with Buddhism. In Buddhism, and I actually called a Buddhist priest, go figure, to make sure that the information was correct. These were some of the highlighted, if somebody were to call me and ask what are the main tenets of Judaism, what are some of your foundational points, I would mention, a whole handful. There may be, that's not to say that there's not more, but they are certainly would be important points. So this list is not the end all and be all of Buddhist philosophy. And again, there's many different sects as well. But this is just a glimpse at some of the similarities of spiritual teachings that are contained in Judaism, that people run to in the East, that are present very much in Judaism. Let's talk about some of the similarities. Buddhism speaks about transforming negative traits. We have negative traits that we must nullify. And in Buddhism, there's a figurative link between the four elements: earth, fire, air, and water. They are not talking about the physical substances. They're not substances, but they're sensory qualities. They're tools for liberating oneself from suffering. The Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, on the opposite end of the spectrum, share a similar perspective based on also the four elements. That we have negative qualities within us. We have natural tendencies to be selfish. And those are also compared to the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Earth representing our natural tendency to laziness. Water representing our natural tendency to pleasuring ourselves, because water is the source of many pleasurable things. Wind being the natural trait to be lightheaded, arrogant, haughty, or gossiper. And fire being our natural drive to, you get all fired up, a person to get angry. What's interesting is the Hindus also mention these four, and they have a fifth element called ether, which links them all, both in the external world and within the person. It's interesting, to say the least, that Rabbi Nachman of Breslov also mentions a fifth inner element, which is the ego, or self-importance, which is the link of the other four elements. Buddhism stresses compassion, and this compassion is a result of perceiving the interconnectedness underlying the unity of life. Judaism, a similar approach. Although we see mankind, as the central figure of creation, we assert our kinship with all beings and all creatures. The Jewish mystics are particularly sensitive toward our sensitivity and our compassion towards all of creation. There are laws in Judaism that mandate that we show compassion to animals. The mystics go even further and show that everything in our world has a godly spark in it, has a godly source of life and light. And everything must be treated with respect. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, says in his diaries that he was walking one day with his father, and without thinking, he tore a leaf. He's walking by, and what do you do when you're walking? He tore a leaf off of a bush as he's walking by. And he says how his father reprimanded him for his not being sensitive toward this tree, this plant, a godly creation. The Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, writes in his Rishimas, which are also his notes, his diaries, a story about the Rebbe Rashab. It was the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe. It says that one time in the Rebbe Rashab's office, could hear crying, and they went in to see what had happened. Why was the Rebbe Rashab crying? And he was crying because when he was moving or something, he had accidentally killed a bug. You see the sensitivity, the compassion that we're meant to show towards everything in creation. Buddhism also speaks about the impermanence, the temporariness of everything that we see around us. The transience of the world. Nothing is lasting. A century or two before the Buddha lived, before he was born, King Solomon spoke of all earthly desires as hevel havalim, which means vanity of vanities, impermanence. In Judaism, the impermanence of the world underscores the urgency of divine service, rather than that we should get on the bandwagon and start serving God and start getting in touch with that which is permanent, the spiritual world, and not waste our time pursuing the vain and materialistic goals that we often chase after. Buddhism and Judaism, reincarnation, heaven's way of enabling a soul to become cleansed of evil and to attain perfection. Also, Buddhism and Judaism, enlightenment, the idea of enlightenment. Enlightenment in Judaism is connected with the mystery of prophecy and also includes varying levels of divine intuition which are able to be achieved even today. We also share a similar scenario with the end of days, the end times. Buddhism describes it as gradual global degeneration, followed by a being who will renew the path leading to nirvana. And that person or that entity is stored away in the heavens until the right time comes. In Judaism, the soul of Mashiach is somewhat similar. It's stored away until God will confer upon that righteous soul the job and the goal to go redeem the world. He will bring wisdom and peace to the world, return the Jewish people to the land of Israel, rebuild the temple, and these events will be followed by eternal bliss for all the righteous. Both faiths also believe in a heaven and a hell as an afterlife experience conditioned by deeds of this world. Now, many of those concepts are the driving force of what leads many Jewish people to the East. I believe in meditation. I believe in reincarnation. I believe in the transience of the world and want to connect. I want to be enlightened. So where are you running? Why are you running? You have it right home. Now to contrast a little bit with Buddhism, in essence and in purpose, Judaism is the diametric opposite of Buddhism and Hinduism and the Eastern philosophy. In Buddhism, there's what's known as the Four Noble Truths. They comprise the foundation of Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths are, the world is suffering. Okay? I see why Jews are on there. It's all about suffering. The whole religion's about suffering. That's why the Jews are on. The cause of suffering is desire. That's the second. The cessation of suffering is the cessation of desire, meaning in order to get rid of suffering, we have to get rid of desire. And in order to get rid of desire, that's achieved through practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So basically, in a nutshell, we sidestep our existential suffering, because all the world is suffering. We sidestep that through dismantling our sense of self. If we lose ourself, if we lose our sense of self, which is the cause of all of our suffering, that sense of self, the ego, if we lose that, and we leave the world behind, we'll end our suffering. That's the ideology. That's the theology. The goal of Buddhism is to escape the wheel of birth and death. The world is a place of suffering, and if you say, oh, it's a world of suffering, I'm just going to end my life. So, since there's reincarnation, you're just going to wind up back here anyway. So, in Buddhism, the way to escape this wheel of life and death, it's attained by achieving a state of nirvana. Nirvana is a transcendental state of consciousness which serves as a exit pass from the wheel of birth and death. It's a level of consciousness. You're outside the world. You're outside of the realm of the physical. You reach this state of being, and that's the state of being that you want to remain in. The religions of the East, Eastern spirituality, focus is only on the spiritual. Judaism, by contrast, is a path of total engagement with this world. We want to be in the world. 613 commands of the Torah are the prescription of how to engage in consecrated actions, holy actions. The Talmud, which seems to delve into every detail, to include every imaginable situation in its scope, sometimes can seem very tedious. What do I need to know about every single type of herb that can be used as bitter herbs for Passover? Why list all of those things? Why give so many examples of what can be used and what can't be used? It seems so tedious, right? But in essence, each and every object on the planet is held up to the light of Torah as a litmus test to see, is it used or is it dismissed as a vehicle for holy action? Is it something we're meant to be interacting with and pursuing and using and utilizing and uplifting? Or is it something we're meant to abstain from? And the only way to truly see it is through the Torah's lens. Jewish mysticism teaches that every physical object contains sparks of holiness, sparks of godliness that keep that thing, that object, into existence. By using an object in the way that's ordained by Torah, those sparks are released and uplifted. Jews are here not to escape the world, but to elevate the world. To interact with each thing in the world in the way prescribed, to uplift it and elevate it as a vehicle to make it godly. You know what the biblical word in biblical Hebrew is for religion? You know, any idea what the biblical Hebrew word is for religion? There is none. Trick question. Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says the reason for that is because there's no separate compartment for the spiritual. The holy imbues the entire sphere of human life. Holiness can be achieved in our entire day. It just depends how we're using everything. Is everything in our day an end in and of itself, or is it a means to a greater end? The purpose of the Eastern philosophies is to transcend the world, to leave the world. The goal would be an aesthetic lifestyle. Don robes, go away from the world. In Judaism, it's to elevate the world and thereby perfect oneself. The dichotomy between Jewish theology, especially when it's perceived through Jewish mysticism, in contrasting with the Eastern philosophies, is seen in the most mundane acts that we do in our average day. Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism would regard celibacy as the highest form, the highest path that one can do when trying to achieve the spiritual. We don't give in to our lower self. That's Eastern philosophy. Celibacy, in fact, in many religions, not just the Eastern religions, is seen as the highest point, the most spiritual thing that you can do. Remove yourself completely from earthly pleasure, from earthly, human, animalistic desires. Torah teaches a very big contrast to that. That with proper discipline and regulation, that act of intercourse can be the act most sanctified in our life. It can be the most denigrated for sure, but it can be the most holy experience that a human being can achieve in this world. Another difference is that Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. Gautama Siddhartha, the historical Buddha, remains silent when asked about God. So one difference is that in Buddhism there's no acknowledgement of God. And the second key is that in Buddhism and Hinduism, the world is ultimately purposeless. The world is purposeless. In Hinduism, which does posit a divine creator, describes the universe as the playground of the gods. Nothing really to achieve. Judaism, on the contrary, centers totally on God and His wisdom and His instruction manual for living, the Torah. Both man and nature have meaning because they were created by a purposeful being. In Judaism, the purpose of life is not just spiritual consciousness, but primarily refined action. Intents, meditations are all good things, but only through consecrated actions is the world uplifted. Exalted consciousness, which does not express itself in concrete actions, is worthless. Judaism does not aim only for an enlightened mind, but for a sanctified body as well. In other faiths, poverty, asceticism, fasting would be seen as spiritual achievements. In Judaism, we take the food, we sanctify it, we uplift it. That when I have my kosher hamburger, with the intent that the energy that I'm going to gain from this hamburger is going to allow me to do something positive with it, that sandwich, that hamburger, that meal has become a spiritual experience. It's no longer a physical end in and of itself, but a means to a spiritual end. My meal can be holy. Working can be holy. If it's not just to make the extra bucks, you can get the BMW and the 4-car garage and whatever. But if the perspective is, I want to work, and I even want to make money, but where's my money going? Why do I want to make money? Do I want to do something in this world? Do I want to leave an impact? Or is it just about me? And what brand my tie is? So our entire day can be holy, and that's the message of Judaism. Imbue the natural. Imbue the material with spirituality. So the Jews believe in karma. We talked about a lot of similarities and also some diametric differences. What about karma? First of all, what is karma? So karma is actually an idea that permeates many cultures. Egypt, Greek, and even the modern quantum physics people all believe in an idea similar to karma. What's karma? Basically means that everything is within the system. So that everything, being that it's in the system, bounces back eventually. What goes around comes around. It's cosmic justice, it's cosmic justice reflective of one's merits and faults. It's cause and effect. Do good, good will come back to you. Do not so good, not so good will come back to you. And that's the wheel of life. Being that everything's in the system, it's all in the cosmos, it'll eventually hit you back one time or another. So do Jews believe that? In karma, everything's in the system, and you can manipulate the system, but you can't escape it. It's all in the system. You did good, good's coming at you. You did bad, that's also going to come at you. It's in the system, it's plugged in. Judaism teaches that is true to an extent, but we, by virtue of our actions, we Jews are beyond the system. We can plead to God to change our system, our fated future. Through tshuva, returning, repentance, we can change our past. We can break the limits of the system. It's like, think of the universe as a computer program. So in the computer program, if you're using a computer program at your house, so the computer program can do something. It has certain capabilities. It can do X and Y. It can't do Z because that's what's programmed in the system. So everybody else is like, oh, well, that's the computer program. It can only do X and Y. Can't do Z. So the Jew says, I'll go to the computer programmer and make it do Z. We're outside the system. We're beyond the system. My favorite analogy to use is the analogy of, did you ever call up your cell phone company when they overcharge you? And you get someone on the phone, you get the receptionist on the phone, you're like, excuse me, this past month you charged me $800 and I didn't even turn my phone on. Can you please help me or whatever? And so the receptionist is looking at their responses to each thing, $800, it didn't turn it on, and looking for their programmed response as far as what they're supposed to tell you. And they say, sorry sir, sorry ma'am, this is the way it goes, nothing we can do. That's our system, that's our policy, that's the way our company works. You get the bill, too bad. What does every good Jew say? Let me talk to your supervisor. Right? And a Jew will take it to the supervisor, to the supervisor, we'll go all the way to the CEO of the company. All the way up there. So in Judaism, as far as karma is concerned, and as far as the universe is concerned, good energy brings good, bad energy brings not as good. There is truth in that. But don't be limited by the system. Just like we practice in all other aspects of our life, we go beyond the system, so too in our spiritual quest. Don't limit yourself. We can go to God. We can go to the computer programmer. We can go to the CEO of the company, the overseer of everything. Let me speak to the supervisor. doesn't necessarily have to be the way in which the cause and effect that I had laid out. Eastern philosophy has a lot to offer for the non-Jewish world, but it is lacking that final step. What's interesting is that Abraham, the Torah says that Abraham, when he sent his children to the east, it was 6 children that he sent. We've talked many times that in Judaism, the number 7 represents completion. 7 days in a week. 7 years in a sabbatical year. 7 notes on the music scale. 7 colors of the rainbow. 7 continents in the world. On all aspects of completion, the number 7 is a number that comes about all the time to teach us completion. It's interesting that Abraham has 6 children with Keturah and sends them to the east, just lacking completion. Spiritual teachings, just lacking the 7. It's 6, it's good, it's the stuff, but just lacking. It's like having 6 days in a week, but never having a Shabbos, the most important day, and the goal of the whole thing, the goal of it all. It's almost there. There's a lot, but it's missing the completion. Rabbi Noach Orlowick, contemporary rabbi, says an interesting word of Torah. He says, even the word for Hindu, Indian, in Hebrew is Hodi. Hey Vav Dalid Yud. He says that the letters are almost exactly the same as God's name. Yud with a Hey and a Vav and then a Hey. The only difference is that in Hodi, it's a Dalid instead of a Yud. If the Dalid it's a Dalid instead of a Hey. If the Dalid would just have a little dot, would have a little Yud there, right? It would have the same letters as God's name. What's a Yud? A Yud is the only letter in the Hebrew alphabet that hovers above the line of the page, representing spirituality and God's oneness. Eastern spirituality almost has it all, but lacks a most essential part. Lacks the Yud. Lacks the conclusion that everything we're trying to accomplish, the realization that at the end of the day, everything is a coherent unit. God is the source of all the physical and the spiritual powers, and God is one. Just that last step, just the little Yud. So with all the spirituality and all the meditation and all the philosophy, which is a great, great thing for them, a Jew needs to look inward. A Jew should find those elements. And I can assure you that anything that a person is looking to the East for, that they should listen to the Dalai Lama and say, it's right here at home. There's a story brought in a work called Sipori Tzadikim, Stories of the Righteous people. And it's also brought by the Al-Shich in Parshas Kisavoy. It tells a story about a man named Isaac, Reb Isaac, who lived in the town of Krakow. And this Reb Isaac, Krakow, had a dream. And in this dream, he dreamt that by a certain bridge in Prague, which is a few hundred miles away, there was a buried treasure in a certain spot. Wow. So he had the dream, and then he had the dream again, and then he had the dream again, and he's starting to think, wow, this must be a sign. I got to go find the treasure. So he packs his bags, and in those days, a few hundred years ago, going a few hundred miles was quite the journey. So he makes the journey, A day goes by, a week, month. Finally, he arrives. This area was guarded by several guards. So he waited for the guards to turn in for the day before he took out his shovel and started digging. So when he looked around, he saw the coast was clear and took out his shovel and starts digging exactly in the spot. It looked exactly as it did in the dream. He was so excited. So he starts digging and digging. All of a sudden, he feels somebody standing over him. It's one of the guards. The guard says, "Excuse me, sir, what do you think you're doing?" And he says, and he's getting really nervous. And he says, he figures, if it's a buried treasure, he's gonna win out no matter what. He says, "I had a dream that right here there's treasure buried, and I tell you what, if you let me dig, I'll split it with you." Why not, right? He's still gonna make out well, right? So half a treasure chest, right? So the guy starts laughing at him and says, "Where are you from?" He says, "I'm from Krakow." "Krakow? You came that entire journey, all this way because of a dream?" And he says, "You don't understand. It pictured it the exact way." He says, "This is so funny," says the guard. "It's so funny because I had a dream, a recurring dream, that there was a person from Krakow who came all this way and had under his oven in his house a buried treasure." And so Rabbi Isaac hears the story, goes back home, he starts digging under his oven, lo and behold, he finds the treasure there. And many times in our life, we think that the treasure can only be found far away, through a long journey, through a place that looks different, people act different, look different than us. That's where the treasure is. We have to realize that the treasure is in our own backyard. The point is that we don't know about it. We don't investigate it. We're looking for the treasure elsewhere and we're standing on it the whole time. Don't go through your life sitting on your buried treasure. And no need to find treasure maps and go elsewhere for it. It's right under your feet. This week's meditation is also a little bit of fun homework. Torah is the genetic material underlying all reality. Any genuine element of reality must be encoded in it. If you dig deeply enough, you'll find it. Modern Jews have not been taught this, and oftentimes look elsewhere for meaning and inspiration. They don't realize that oftentimes that what they find runs parallel to Torah, only that the Torah penetrates it even deeper. I invite everybody to explore their roots, to explore their Judaism, and to learn Torah the authentic and classical way that it's always been learned. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.